Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's case is actually about an 8-year-old little girl named Nicole Morin who ended up vanishing without a trace, and to this day, about 36 years later, no one knows where she is. This is actually the case that made me want to start this channel. I've known about this case my entire life. It is actually the most extensively searched case in Toronto's history, and I really don't hear anyone ever talking about it. This case was actually so detrimental to Toronto's history that it actually changed the way that people parented. The scene where this took place is actually not very far from where I live in Toronto, and I know the area very well. This case is one of those cases that just keeps me up at night wondering like what happened to her. So yeah, let's get into this case. Nicole Louise Morin was born April 1st, 1977 to mother Jeanette and truck driving father Art Morin. And they lived in Etobicoke, which is a suburb of Toronto, Canada. Jeanette and Art were married for about 12 years before Nicole was born, and it seems that before she was born, they had been trying for that entire time to have a child together, and finally, 12 years later, Nicole arrived. But about 6 years after Nicole was born, they ended up separating. There's not much known about the early life of Nicole that I could find, so the story's just gonna fast forward to when Nicole is 8 years old. Her mother and father are separated, and she's currently living with her mother. Nicole and her mother were living at a penthouse suite at 627 The West Mall in Etobicoke, and as far as we know, Art was living in Mississauga at the time. Nicole was said to be like any 8-year-old little girl. She was happy-go-lucky and cheerful. Her favorite place to eat was McDonald's, and she loved to go to Ontario Place. I went to Ontario Place growing up. It is definitely a memory I have in the back of my mind from when I was even like 8 years old. She was taking swimming and dance lessons. She even had these cute little half chop bangs like I had in the 90s. Nicole's friend Melissa Laschuk actually did some interviews describing her childhood spent with Nicole. She said Nicole and I would walk together to school every day. They had a lot of fun playing together, and that they would make their own fun using their imagination and playing together outside. And they used to go swimming together all the time at the pool in the back of the building.
She was smart, she was fun. We got along very well. You know, she was the sister I didn't have at the time.
I was exactly Nicole's age, and I remember going downstairs to the pool to play with my friends there, and the lifeguard would actually sometimes take us to the corner store, and we'd go and get treats and then walk back with the lifeguard. So it's safe to say that Nicole was just like every other little 8-year-old girl. It was the start of summer, and the only thing on her mind was playing at the pool with her friends. So on a hot summer day on July 30th of 1985, Nicole made plans with her friend Jen to go swimming, and this would be at the apartment building's pool out back. And so their plan to go swimming that day was to meet in the apartment's lobby at 11 a.m. So at 10:30 a.m. Nicole went downstairs using the elevator into the lobby and got the mail, because there's usually like mailboxes in the lobbies of these buildings, and she got the mail and went back upstairs to her apartment with no incident. She then put on a peach one-piece swimsuit that had stripes down the front, a green headband, and red canvas shoes. And the last time that Jeanette would see her daughter is when Nicole was finishing up some food. She grabbed a peach colored blanket, a plastic bag that had a purple towel in it, and she said goodbye to her mother and walked out the apartment door down the hallway towards the elevator, and Nicole would never be seen again. So the way that a lot of these apartment buildings are is there's two sets of doors, and in between these two sets of doors that you walk in, there is like a buzzer, and then you can type in a code, it'll buzz someone upstairs, and they can open the second door for you. And when you punch in those numbers, it turns into like an intercom, and you can talk to the person upstairs that's answering. So we have to remember that this is back in the 1980s. No one had cell phones. So the way that Nicole and her friends would talk to each other, instead of having to go up and down the building every time they wanted to talk, was using the intercom system at the front. So it said to be about 15 minutes later when Jen buzzed upstairs to Nicole's apartment, because Nicole wasn't downstairs yet, and Jeanette answered and was greeted by Jen, who asked her when Nicole was coming down to meet her. Now, Jeanette wasn't really startled by this question. Sometimes the elevators in these buildings take a lot of time, and Jeanette just thought maybe she was dawdling around. Kids like to dawdle. She thought, you know, maybe Jen had missed her in the lobby and Nicole had just went out to the pool to wait for her there and was playing with some kids out back. But either way, Jeanette wasn't really startled. She just let Jen know that Nicole had left, she'd be on her way down, and that was it. Like I mentioned, this was the 1980s, and back in those days, kids would kind of just roam around all day until the streetlights came on. And at the time, Jeanette was actually running an in-home daycare, so it wasn't like she could just leave the little kids and go and check if she wanted to. So now at this point, Jen is still waiting in the lobby. She still hasn't seen Nicole. Nicole still hasn't come down as far as she's known, and so she just decides to go over to the pool, and maybe Nicole was already there. She wasn't really just gonna sit around the lobby all day and wait. It wasn't until around 4 hours later, around 3 p.m., that Jeanette actually started to realize that Nicole might not be out by the pool. That is because, as far as we know, she had an older child that she babysat, and she had sent him to go to the pool, and he had come back and told her that Nicole wasn't there. So Jeanette ended up sending the little boy back out again to go check again, basically thinking like she has to be somewhere out there playing with someone, so go find her, which is a little strange, sending a child out to go find another child. There's not really much known about this little boy, not really sure how old he was, or whose child he may have been. Another article cited that at 3 p.m. when that little boy came and told Jeanette that Nicole wasn't at the pool, that Jeanette ended up calling Jen's parents and asking them if they knew where Nicole was, and they said that they hadn't seen Nicole all day. So this was actually huge for the case though, because it wasn't until around 6 p.m. when Jeanette realized that Nicole wasn't home for supper that she ended up calling the police. And as we know, the first few hours of a child being missing are the most crucial, and as far as we know, at this point, Nicole was missing for about 7 hours. So that means that the police were already 7 hours behind when they were called. So that is the basic sum up of Nicole going missing. Now, before we get into the investigation and figuring out where Nicole is, I just want to address something that is a little bit confusing. 2 reenactments were made to show the timeline of events leading up to Nicole's disappearance. One was made in 2007 and one was made in 2014, and both videos are pretty different regarding the timeline of events that happened. I'll have them both linked down below if you want to watch them in full. But in the first reenactment from 2007, Jen didn't live in the building. So she went into Nicole's building, buzzed upstairs, came in, waited in the lobby for 15 minutes, and then when Nicole didn't come down, she ended up buzzing back up again. And when Nicole didn't show, she ended up going to the pool. So basically the timeline I explained. Now in the 2014 version, Jen lived in the building and they both agreed to meet in the lobby, and then when Nicole didn't arrive, she just goes straight to the pool. The strange thing about this is I think there are elements of both videos that are true. I'm pretty sure it's been debunked that Nicole did live in the same building as Nicole and that she lived on the 7th floor in specific. And that is because there was a list of tenants that was released and Jen's parents' names were on that list, living on the 7th floor. So at the same time, I can also believe that Jen did buzz upstairs. Jeanette answered. She was like, she's probably at the pool, and then Jen ended up leaving and not waiting anymore. I also read somewhere stated that Jen remembered watching the elevator go up to Nicole's floor and then coming straight back down and no one was in it. I'm not 100% sure if that is factual. I just wanted to leave that out there. It'd be even creepier if that was true, because that probably means that Nicole never even got onto the elevator and that she was taken in her hallway. As I said, this was the most extensive search case in Toronto's history. It had hundreds of volunteers, a 20-person police task force, and over 25,000 hours of investigation time put into this case. Yet still, no concrete evidence has ever been found or disclosed to the public. So let's break down possibly why. Pretty immediately, Jeanette and Art were cleared as suspects. All the newspapers and the articles reported that police pulled out all the stops for this case. There was a little missing 8-year-old girl. As far as everyone knew, she had left her house, got in the elevator, and vanished. Police went door to door to everyone's apartments. They set up roadblocks to circulate vehicles. There were helicopters, tracking dogs explored the underground, the utility room, storage unit, sub pump rooms. So the one thing about the police investigation that I don't 100% believe, but it is stated in all the articles. So it stated that the police knocked on every single door in the apartment building, and that even if no one answered, they broke in and checked the unit. The thing that I don't 100% believe on that is that you have to understand that this was a huge apartment building, and it was actually 2 apartment buildings that were connected by a hallway, as far as I know. But this apartment building had over 400 units in it. I've lived in many apartment buildings that were extremely similar to this building. I just don't believe that they could knock on every single person's door and then break into ones that no one answered. Normally you have to get a search warrant to enter someone's house. I just don't understand if the rules were different back in the 1980s. I don't know, maybe it's not as wild as I think it is. But even if they did end up searching every single apartment building, that would take a long amount of time. You know how long it would take to search 400 units? And on top of that, if someone did take Nicole, they had a 6 or 7 hour advantage on the police. She might not have even been in that building anymore. The one thing I do wonder, which I don't really see much talked about, is if there were any registered sex offenders that were living in the building at the time. Who was living in those halls? Even though the police put in all of this work, there is no physical evidence that was ever found. I did see mentioned somewhere that her shoe was found, but it's never been declared that it was. So all of this work has went into this case. It's November now. Police have interviewed over 6,000 people, and this also apparently included hundreds of sex offenders. They also offered up a $100,000 reward that is still available till today. The fact that there is no evidence found, we also have to remember that this is the 1980s, and back in the 1980s, they didn't have the same tools and knowledge that we do have nowadays. They didn't have the same kind of technology in collecting evidence, and so a lot of evidence could have been lost that might have been there, and we just will never have that evidence ever again. So a day or 2 after Nicole vanished, a little girl was heard screaming in the woods. It was heard by a mother and daughter on their property on Horseshoe Valley Road near Barrie. Billie Jo Player and her mother heard a little girl screaming from the woods saying, "Stop, please, you're hurting me." And then there was silence. Billie Jo's mother immediately thought of the little girl, aka Nicole Morin, who had went missing from Toronto. And it is reported that the screams were so loud that even the neighbors could hear them. And they also reported this all to the police. Everyone that heard those screams truly does believe that that day they heard a little girl being murdered. But Billie Joe doesn't remember any searches being done, even though all of these people reported this. Even crazier is that no one would actually search the area for another 29 years. And that is because on July 29th, 2014, police made a statement that they were reopening Nicole's case. And that is then when they released that second reenactment video. And when that video went out, Billie Joe ended up seeing it on TV, and it reignited those memories of hearing that little girl screaming in the woods. So she ended up calling into the police again and letting them know about that memory she had. And so they ended up interviewing her and deciding that her claim could be credible. So that is when the police decided to go search the area of Springwater Township north of Barrie. They used ground penetrating radar as well as cadaver dogs and scoured the area. There was one point where they thought they might have found something and dogs alerted to something, so they used the ground penetrating radar. They started digging and they ended up finding nothing, so they ended up closing the search. What's even odder is that around the same time Nicole ended up going missing, and in that kind of era of time, there were multiple other little girls that were being abducted and murdered. Christine Jessup was actually 9 years old when she went missing the October before Nicole vanished. Her body was found about 3 months later, and she had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. 36 years later, actually this year, her killer was found to be Kelvin Hoover, who ended up dying in 2015. Sharon Keenan, who was also 9, was abducted in January of 1983, and her body was found about a week later. Her suspected murderer is thought to be Dennis Melvin, who is still on the run till this day and has never been apprehended. Allison Parrott, 11, disappeared in July 1986, and her body was found 2 days later. That's the thing that's so crazy about this case, is that all of these little girls were going missing, but they were all being found. Yet Nicole simply just vanished. Like, it gives me chills. Just like, 1 minute she was there, the next minute she wasn't. I really do think I should do a case on all of these little girls that were going missing in and around Toronto. At that point in time, there were so many of them. It's just so strange, and they all had a different killer, so it was like, there's so many little girls being killed in this short time frame. It's just super strange. And so yeah, let me know down below if you want to see a video on that. So at one point in this investigation, the police ended up traveling all the way to Quebec to interview Art Morin's brother-in-law, who was convicted of killing Art's sister Gertrude in 1961. But he has since died, and police have determined that he was not in Toronto at the time of Nicole's disappearance. But as you can see, police were like literally leaving the province and going to different provinces interviewing people. Like, they were putting in some work. Even though I think it was really sketchy about the apartment thing, I really don't think this is one of those cases where the police are doing the least. They were definitely doing the most in this case, and they still weren't finding anything, which is wild. There are so many cases where the police don't really do much, and it's infuriating, but in this case, it's kind of the opposite. It's like they were doing so much, yet nothing was turning up. It's strange though, because at one point the police actually made an announcement to the media that they were sure that they were going to find Nicole within a few days, and they even halted their search to focus on the investigation side. But they refused to say what evidence they had found or where it had been found at the time, which happens all the time. Police don't want to release any information that may ruin the case, but at this point it's been 36 years, so it's kind of a little strange. There was another article that actually indicated that this couple had found a headband that was reported to look like Nicole's. They found that near Bradford, which is, if you didn't know, pretty far away, but police ended up deeming it unimportant to Nicole's case. I know that you guys are gonna find this just as strange as I did. Let's just talk about Jeanette for a moment. Nicole wasn't her first child to go missing. You heard me right. She was actually married to a man before Art, and she had a son with him. And this husband of hers ended up taking her son and running off with him. So as far as I gathered, it was a parental abduction. But Jeanette never found out where they went or what happened to him. As far as I've read, that they went to California, but it wasn't until about 15 years later that her son just showed up on her doorstep being like, "Hey mom." So that was strange. It could all just be a very strange coincidence, because she didn't really have anything to do with her first child going missing. Still very strange. Jeanette and Art ended up kind of reconciling and getting back together for about a year after Nicole disappeared, but then they ended up divorcing about a year after. And soon after they did divorce, Jeanette ended up moving out of the building that Nicole went missing from. And since we talked about Jeanette, I think we need to talk about Nicole's father, Art, for a moment. Art is literally the image of who you'd want your father to be if you went missing. Art left his job, he set up an office, hired a private investigator, and then spent the next few years literally devoting all of his time to trying to find Nicole. He even sent posters of her to world embassies, and just in case if she was taken out of the country that maybe someone would spot her. He even flew across the country to Vancouver Island for a tip, but the girl ended up not being Nicole. He even went across the border to the US looking into tips, but nothing ever came of it. It seems on Jeanette's end, she ended up hiring a psychic in Calgary to try to find Nicole, but nothing ever came of that either. Eventually, Jeanette ended up moving to North Bay, and unfortunately in 2007, she ended up dying of a heart attack. It's said that she's never lost hope for finding her daughter. It's just really tragic knowing that Nicole was never found and that Jeanette died not knowing whatever happened to her daughter. However, it is mentioned that Nicole was not included in Jeanette's obituary, and people were really skeptical about that. They thought it was very strange that like her son was mentioned and her grandchildren were mentioned, but Nicole was never mentioned in the obituary. And honestly, I have no clue why she wasn't included. It's very strange. So when we hear a child has gone missing, a lot of people who are into true crime immediately go to child trafficking. This was actually a point in this case. In 2004, a Belgian organization that I'm not even going to try to pronounce claimed that they matched a photo of Nicole off of Canada's police website with a child in a pedophile network in Zandvoort, which is in the Netherlands. I couldn't find the photos online to compare them. People were saying the photo of the little girl was very grainy and it was really hard to tell. Unfortunately, there's no physical evidence ever recovered that says this is true, but it's definitely somewhere where a lot of people's minds go when you hear a child is missing, especially for this long. Normally, children aren't kidnapped for positive reasons. And unfortunately, child trafficking is a huge problem in the world. It's just so scary to think that this adorable little girl could have like met that kind of end, and I don't think a lot of people want to think that way. I know a lot of people want to believe that she's still alive 36 years later, but unfortunately, it's highly unlikely. So flash forward into present time, 2021, there still to this day is a task force dedicated to trying to find Nicole. It's made up of 3 officers and led by Constable Nicole Sutton. They've been trying to organize runs and candlelight visuals, but obviously because of COVID, something like that couldn't have happened in the last year. Unfortunately, cases like this, it's really hard to try to get new information and new leads. So their main goal is to try to keep Nicole's memory alive and try to bring in as many new tips as possible. It's also a reason why I'm doing this video. So let's get into some theories. And I'm gonna start with the biggest one, the most popular one, and the one that I personally think happened. And that is that Nicole's disappearance was a crime of opportunity. Again, you have to realize that this was a huge apartment building, over 400 units in it. And I honestly think the best theory is that Nicole was lured and she was kidnapped. The fact that Nicole just vanished, I think it makes the most sense that Nicole was taken in the hallway or from the elevator when it went down. And here's why I think that would have been extremely easy to do. Nicole was 8 years old. She was just a young child, but she had a routine. She was going to the pool pretty much every single day, and she was going down to the pool pretty much alone. Someone could have easily known about her routine of going to the pool. Pretty much all the children were doing this at that point in time. Kids didn't really have video games to play. It wasn't like they were sitting in the house. They were out and having fun outside. I'm not 100% sure if this specific building had this system, but I know personally my dad's building had this system when I was growing up. Sorry, I had to let the dog out. I know growing up, my dad's building had this system, and I've heard that a lot of other buildings in Toronto had systems like this. So there wasn't cameras throughout the building, but there was a camera in the lobby. And if you went onto a certain television station, you could view the CCTV footage of that camera in the lobby, so you can watch people in the lobby. And we used to put it on for fun, or if one of our friends or family members were coming over, we'd turn it on and watch and wait for them to come, and it was kind of like this exciting thing that we do as kids for fun. What I'm trying to get at is that anyone could view the system that lived in the building, as long as they had a television and they knew what channel to go to. If someone in the building was stalking Nicole, it would have been very easy for them to watch her on the CCTV footage of the lobby and know when she was coming or going, and knowing when she was going to be alone. There's a lot of sick people out there, and I would put it past someone to sit on their couch and watch the CCTV footage to see what children were walking in and out of the building by themselves, and know that she left every day around a certain time to go swimming by herself. And when they seen her friend buzzing up, they might have known that Nicole was going to leave soon, so they came out at the same time, possibly lured her in with like, oh, I'm going to the pool too, like, I'll come down with you, just give me a moment. Like, come over here and wait with me, I'm gonna go grab my towel or something, and then snatched her. Or you gotta remember, she was 8 years old. They could have easily just been like, oh, I got a new puppy, do you wanna see it? And she would have been like, yeah, of course I do, and went into the house. I think it would have been extremely easy for someone to have kidnapped Nicole. At the same time, it could have been on a different floor, same situation. They knew she was going down, so they waited, they pressed the button, They seen her in the elevator and they snatched her. People really question like how would no one hear a little girl being kidnapped, but honestly, I pretty much lived in an apartment building my entire life, and it's kind of rare that you see other people in the hallway. It's not as common to see other people in the hallways as you think it would be. And you know, if they did end up snatching her and putting her in her apartment, there are so many cases that prove that people have been held hostage for long periods of time in plain sight. Like the Fidel Castro case, for example, or the Elizabeth Smart case. The scary thought is that Nicole could still be in that apartment building this day and just no one knows. At the same time, she was so tiny. If they subdued her at all, they could have easily put her in a suitcase and just wheeled her out. You gotta remember, this person had like 6 or 7 hours on everyone. No one knew she was missing. So they had so much time to get rid of her or take her somewhere. Also, with buildings that big, people are moving in and out all the time. They could have easily just put her into a moving box with the rest of their stuff and out she went. There's so many possibilities, especially for a small little girl. Like, she was only 51 pounds. She was 4 feet tall. Like, she was so tiny. It would have been so easy for in 6 or 7 hours to get rid of her. Those are just a couple possibilities that I thought of. I'm sure there's a million others that could have happened. And there's also the theory that maybe she did go downstairs and Jen didn't see her and Nicole wandered off to go to the pool and someone snatched her outside. There is reported to be a few witnesses that did see Nicole outside, but I don't know if they were ever ruled as credible because I've never really seen it as an actual theory. It's always that Nicole was kidnapped from her hallway or the elevator. She just vanished. So there's also the other case that if this wasn't a crime of opportunity and it was definitely something that was more so planned. Like I said, I've lived in buildings like these. They normally operate with like a key system, or they have like a key fob nowadays, but back then it was probably just like an actual key or like a swipe card or something to get in and out of the building, so you didn't have to type in the code all the time. But usually for like back doors and stuff, there was some kind of key system that you would use to get into the doors or to the garage and stuff like that. If it wasn't someone that lived in the building, someone easily could have been watching her swimming in the pool every single day. It just had like a chain fence around it, and as sick as it is, they might have gotten obsessed with her and had been watching her for a while and had decided they wanted to kidnap her. It's proven with the other cases that I mentioned earlier that there were a lot of little girls that were being taken out of plain sight, so it's not really that strange that a stranger could have killed Nicole. They could have easily just like followed someone into the building or tailgated into the garage. They could have parked downstairs. They could have been watching and known that that was kind of the time of day when she came down, got in the elevator, went up, waited for her, and then snatched her in the elevator, took her down to the basement floor because the elevators went right into the garage, put her in their car, and left because you didn't need a key to leave the garage. Scary thing is that where this apartment building is situated is right next to the freeway. And scary enough, you can use that freeway to just go straight down to the US border in Buffalo, and it would only take, I'd say, about an hour and a half to get to the United States border from where they were situated. So again, there was plenty of time for someone to even take Nicole out of the country. I don't know how strict the borders were at that time. Like, I don't know how extensively they searched vehicles in the 1980s, but it's a possibility that they could have just taken her, jumped on the freeway, and escaped to the US even. Could have jumped on the freeway and gone somewhere else in Canada as well. So I thought I would mention some other theories as well in this case. This one is going to chill you. I'm telling you, this one, I don't even want to read it because it actually freaks me out and it like gives me the chills. When I was researching this case, it was like 3 in the morning and I sat here and I was actually scared because it is so freaky, and that is the theory that Nicole knew she was going to go missing. When Nicole's apartment was searched, I've heard different theories if it was a police officer or her father, but someone found a notebook of Nicole's, and written in this notebook in her little pencil handwriting were the words, "I'm going to disappear." What? It makes me have to question, how does an 8-year-old know the word disappear, and why would an 8-year-old write in their notebook that they're going to disappear? That just doesn't sound like something a normal 8-year-old would write. My only thought is, did Nicole overhear someone talking about her disappearing? A lot of people have really seemed to look into Nicole's mother, Jeanette. Besides the fact that her first son went missing and stuff, what people thought was really sketchy, she ended up going back to work a week after Nicole disappeared. Now, I can't really judge her on that. We don't know everyone's financial situation. She might not have been able to afford her rent or to live if she had stopped working. So I can't really judge her for going back to work a week after her daughter goes missing. It's not like she was working for a company where she could just be like let off on leave. She was watching other people's children. So, you know, on top of that, these people rely on her to have their children watched while they work and stuff. So I kind of understand how she would start working. Maybe she just needed to get her mind off of it. A lot of people have judged her for that, and again, she is now deceased, so I don't really think it's something we can specifically judge on because we didn't, again, know her financial situation. It's also said that about a week or so before Nicole did go missing, she was watching a crime show with her mother about missing people. And so people thought maybe that is why she wrote it in her book, but I still don't see why an 8-year-old would write that into their notebook. It doesn't sound like something that they would just decide to write. I wish we could see a photo of it or something to see if there was any other context to it, any drawings or anything else in the book that would indicate it. It is said that she wrote this about a month prior to her disappearance. Another huge point in this case is that a neighbor reported a mysterious blonde woman with a notebook or a clipboard in the penthouse hallway about 45 minutes before Nicole disappeared. And that really leads to asking, who was she? Why was she there? Apparently what's known is that she didn't live there, no one recognized her, and that she was wearing all white. No one ever came forward claiming to be her or knowing anything else about her. I know web sleuths did have a theory that Nicole was abducted by her father's church, and that is solely because back in the initial investigation, Art had discussed that possibly for whatever reason he thought maybe someone from his church could have taken her, or the church in general, because some people are saying it was kind of like a culty type church. But anyways, Art ended up dismissing this and not really talking about it after that. He didn't think it was a theory anymore. And I'm not 100% sure if they think Art was involved with it because he was getting divorced with his wife and wanted to like take Nicole, kind of like what happened with Jeanette's first son. I just really cannot believe that Art would be involved in the disappearance of his daughter solely because he's just so dedicated to solving this case. He quit his job, he spent all his money on getting private detectives against what the police wanted, and just spent his entire life trying to find Nicole. I don't really think that he would be involved in her disappearance like that. Additionally, this theory is kind of thrown out the window, but it was mentioned quite a bit. And that it is in 1988, there was a registered sex offender by the name of Levy Lee Riddle, and he confessed to kidnapping an 8 or 9-year-old girl named Nicole from Canada and delivering her to Texas, where he believes that she was killed. But I think that was also kind of thrown out the window. It didn't really make sense. They kind of think he was just kind of clout chasing, because criminals like to do that and claim crimes that they weren't involved in for their own sick amusement. I don't know. Anyways, this case just bugs me. I just can't imagine being in Jeanette and Art's shoes, living in that same apartment for a year after your child goes missing, and then every person you're meeting in the hallways or passing by in the lobby, you thinking, was it them? Are they the one that kidnapped my child? Are they holding my child hostage? Did they kill my child? But yeah, this case bugs me. It's just so crazy that 36 years later, no one knows what happened to this little girl, and there's literally no evidence. There's not even a hair, there's not a shoe, there's not anything. But when you really look at it, there was so much opportunity back in the 80s for things like this to happen. There wasn't cameras every 5 feet everywhere you go. People left their doors unlocked. People would send their kids out till the streetlights came on, and no one ever thought anything of it. There wasn't the same technology back then as there is now. It was just a completely different time. And if a crime like that happened nowadays, I feel like it would be much more easy to solve it. Even though I'm pretty sure Nicole was kidnapped for nefarious reasons, we can always hold out hope, because there is proof from many cases that people have turned up after being kidnapped for long periods of time, that maybe she was kidnapped and brainwashed to think that she was someone else's child, and she's living somewhere out there right now, living her life, and she's alive. With all the things we know, it's really hard to think positively like that and not think that something probably terrible happened to her, because there were so many cases back in that time period in that area where so many terrible things were happening to little girls. But yeah, let me know down below your opinions and what you think happened to Nicole. But I just really think this is a very important case, and I really do think it's going to keep you up at night, just like it's kept me up at night. So at the time of her disappearance, Nicole was just 4 feet tall. She was 51 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. Over the years, police have released age progression photos to try to document what Nicole might look like as she's getting older. She would be in her 40s now, so if she's out there right now, she is not looking like the same little cute girl she was when she was taken when she was 8 years old. She is much older and definitely looks a lot different, so it's really good that they are putting out these age progression photos. You can't be looking for a little 51-pound, 4-foot, 8-year-old anymore. We're looking for a 40-plus-year-old adult woman. This case is just so sad. Jeanette's dead, and Art is now 81 years old. He is living in Etobicoke now, as far as I know. The disappearance of his daughter really does still haunt him. He has a picture of her in his wallet that he carries around. I know he stopped doing interviews a few years back because it just hurts him so much to have to keep reliving this. I think what everyone's just kind of just hoping for is that something will come about and that Nicole would be found before her father dies. This is making me emotional to think about. It's just so sad. Neither parent could know what happened to their child. In the last interview Art ever did, he still holds out hope that he will find out what happened to his daughter.
I never thought that it would run so long. I mean, you just keep going 1 year at a time, and you keep hoping.
Oh, this is it's really nice.
Art Morin pulls out pictures of his daughter from his wallet, saying he never thought 30 years would pass with still no trace of Nicole.
There's absolutely nothing. Then, you know, you have to keep your hopes up that one day, you know, we'll find out. We'll find out one day.
Someone out there knows what happened to Nicole. I know this case is old, but if there's anyone out there that has any information, I'm going to leave some links down below. Christine Jessup's killer was just found this year, so there is still hope that 36 years later we can figure out what happened to Nicole. This case really scared parents in Toronto. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I grew up knowing this case. I grew up seeing the posters of her face plastered on telephone poles. I remember not being allowed to go to the pool by myself because of this exact case. If you want to see more cases like Nicole's, please hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be posting cases weekly, and let me know down below if there's any specific cases that you would like to see. And with that, I'm going to let you go.